Okay, good evening, everyone. So we're up to Parshat Vayetze, and just a couple of words of setting the scene for the one verse, one very famous verse we're going to take a look at this evening is Yaakov Avinu is on the lam. He's running away from the murderous designs of his brother Esav, and as he's beginning to leave the kedusha, the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael, he has this dream about a ladder. Where exactly he was lying when the dream take place is a big controversy of its own. They want to say that the ladder itself actually pierces the heavens and reaches Shemayim, the abode of God, over Yerushalayim, even though he was perhaps in Beit El, in the Shomron, in the area we call Binyamin these days. When you go to the town of Beit El, up in the Shomron, when you come in right away, there are all these signs. Visit the site of Jacob's dream. I've never actually stopped by there, but I'm sure I have a lot of confidence it's not the place where the dream took place. But there is a traditional location that people go to and they say tefillot. And when I went to visit my grandson learning in the yeshiva in Beit El, there are representations in the yeshiva and brachot about this being the place where Yaakov Avinu had the dream. At the end of the dream, God, after appearing at the top of this ladder, gives a bracha to Yaakov Avinu. And this famous verse is the bracha. And it should be, Zaracha, your literally seed, translation is as descendants, your offspring, should be ka'afar haaretz, as numerous, perhaps, we're going to see some commentaries on that, as the dust of the earth. Ufaratzta, anybody who's been connected to any Chabad or Lubavitch programming, feels like singing this. Ufaratzta, that you will spread. Yama is west, Kedma is east, Tzefona is north, and Negba is south. More about that in just a second. So that's the first part of the bracha, that you should be numerous in spread. The second part of the bracha, v'nivrachu b'cha kol mishpachot ha'ada u'b'zarecha, and all of the families of the earth, all of mankind, should be blessed through you and your progeny, your descendants, your offspring, your children. Just before we really talk about two different issues in the text, about the spreading is the big issue, and a little bit about the blessing and the sand. But just before that, something about directions, Hebrew directions. When you say Hebrew directions, usually we think of yashar va'az tishal, go straight, and then ask, because that's how most Israelis give directions. But I'm talking about the 4 points of the compass. So in our verse, the 4 points of the compass are referred to as Yama for the west, because the directions are based on Eretz Yisrael. Yam is Yam HaTichon, the sea, the Mediterranean. And so on the west side of the country is the Mediterranean Sea. Kedma is east, because that's where we believe history began, but that's where the day begins. That's where the sun rises. Tzfona is the north, and the word tzafon means hidden. And the reason it's hidden is because the sun is never in the north. Now, as the sun rises in the east, goes across the southern horizon, and then sets in the west. But it's never in the north. The north is hidden. So the north is always the area of terra incognito, the land we know nothing about. and it's considered the area of danger. When you go, okay, when you go to the book of Jeremiah, of Yirmiyahu, they talk about all the troubles, all the bad guys are going to come out of the Tzafon, the north, the hidden area. And the north was where the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, most of the bad guys who came and conquered Israel came out of the north. So the north is considered like bad. And Tzafon means hidden or covered, unknown. And the last is Negba, is the south. And the south, Negev, is the area of southern Israel, which is the desert, the Negev desert, but it also means dry, because for us, it means that's where there's very little water, a lot of heat, a lot of sun, and so it just made sense that those are the four directions based upon the way they are here in Eretz Yisrael. But there are other terms that we use for the directions. Sometimes we talk about the west being Ma'arav, because that's where Erev, the evening, begins. Okay? Sometimes we have talked about the west as being Achor, behind me, my back, because we tend to face the east. We daven facing east, and the sun rises the backside, my backside. Okay? And we talk about the east as being Kedma, the beginning, but it's also called Mizrach, because that's where Zricha, the shining of the sun, takes place. Tzfona is always called Tzfona. There really isn't another name for Tzfona, but there are two more names for the south. It's Negev, which means both dry and a reference to the geographical area of that desert, which is called the Negev. It's also called Darom, and it's also called Teman. And Teman really means the right hand. And the reason it means the right hand is because we find direction starting by facing east. And we face east, and then my right hand is going to be on the south. So the south is referred to as the right-hand side. Early maps till about the year, give or take, 1500, maybe a little bit early in that, 1450, always the top of the map was east. It was only when we started mapping the voyages of discovery, whether that meant going around Africa to the East Indies or going to the Americas, only then, when we started putting those maps out, did we put north at the top. Before that, at the top of all maps was the east, and that's how you oriented yourself, because the orient is the east. So you orient yourself by facing the east, and then from there figuring out what the other directions are. Okay, so those are the directions in the verse, and we're supposed to spread. But what does spread mean? So we're going to the first 3 or 4 of our commentaries. We're going to talk about what this idea of spreading means. And Rashi says, ufaratz doesn't really mean spread. It really means become strong. Because the word pei resh tzadi means to break through. So you got to be powerful, break through. Like the more they became stronger, that is a reference to the first chapter of Shemot, when the Jews kept getting numerous in Egypt, but that's not what bothered the Egyptians. They weren't just numerous, they were also strong. So peretz can mean to be forceful and make a breakthrough because of power, not just to be numerous. Okay, the Ibn Ezra on the exact same word. Oh, I missed a typo. It should be IBN. I skipped the B. Ufaratsta shouldn't be either strong or breakthrough. It should mean multiply. Vayifrotz ha'ish, and the man became very spread out, wealthy. There was a tremendous increase in his family and his wealth. So that's what it's really talking about. So when the bracha is given by God to Yaakov, it may mean breakthrough, spread, but it could also mean be strong, be powerful, be numerous, but it could also mean be wealthy. The Sforno still talking about this exact same term about ufaratsta. And it said, you're going to be ufaratsta, numerous, a breakthrough in terms of numbers. V'hayeh zaracha ka'afar haaretz, and your seed should be like the dust of the earth. What's that mean? After your descendants will have multiplied so that they are as the dust of the earth, they will be as numerous as the sands, which can't be counted. In numbers, you will spread out. First, there'll be a lot of you. Only after the number is large, then you start to spread. The expression is to be understood as similar to towards the end of the book of Isaiah, Yeshayahu, so that you make your back like the ground. What does that mean? You make your back like the ground, like a street for passers-by. You spread out to the entire world so that no one can go anywhere without bumping into you. There are Jews everywhere. And this particular idea, and it's very much embodied in the philosophy of Chabad, who opens centers everywhere and loves this phrase and sings it quite often in many Chabad smachot, joyous occasions. But the idea before there was this idea of the Rebbe to spread shlichim, representatives all over the world, was the Jews will be everywhere. It's very hard to go to any place on planet Earth and not bump into Jews. We just really are spread out throughout the world. And you just can't go anywhere without bumping into a Jew. Precisely when the Jewish people will have reached a low point in their collective experience. When was that? Downtrodden by the Egyptians or later exiles. There are many times in Chutz La'aretz the Jews were persecuted terribly and situations were dire. But after that happens, they will expand and become powerful in a measure never before seen on earth. So in other words, there are times when things will be bad, but there are also going to be times when you look around the world and Jews are successful and contributing to world civilization all over the place. Then it says, Yama Kedmat Tzvon Negba, the four directions where you'll spread. When the time arrives, Bilam's prophecy toward the end in Parashat Balak will happen. In other words, we can see in the bracha of God to Yaakov, we can hear a hint, an echo of that bracha in the later poetic blessings that Bilam, who was a bad guy but gave us beautiful blessings, gave us toward the end of the book of Bamidbar. And it says, V'karkar kol b'nei Shet, it will smash the foundations of the children of Shet. And that means of all mankind. Because if you remember, Adam Arishon had three sons that he has Cain and Abel, and Cain kills Abel, but most of humanity end up being the descendants of the third son, who was born later, Shet. So Shet means all mankind. Jews are going to shake the foundations of all of mankind. The final redemption of the Jewish people will come after they have suffered the low point in their history, which is why a lot of people felt that Hakamat HaMedina, that the arising of the Jewish state here in Eretz Yisrael, was the beginning of the Messianic redemption, because we definitely reached a low point during the Holocaust, and immediately afterwards we had the beginning of the Jewish state. So a lot of people saw this as Reshit Smichat Gulotenu, as the beginning of our final redemption. I'd like to think that there's truth to it, but the last 80 years have been difficult. We'll have to see. Maybe it's still going to be true, but it hasn't happened, immediately like some people thought it might. And this is based on a Gemara in Sanhedrin. If you see a generation experiencing so many persecutions that it appears a raging river is inundating them, they're drowning in the torrent of their tzarot, wait for the ending. For the prophet Isaiah describes the redemption as immediately after having described the very opposite. So in other words, sometimes when we are being tossed and we are being really, destroyed by so many terrible things in history, but afterwards there's a turnaround, and sometimes the turnaround is very quick. And then it says at the end, and all of your children will be blessed. All the children of the world will be blessed through you and your offspring. The same type of blessing was mentioned in Isaiah, because you will then be known and revered as the priests of the Lord. They'll receive their divine blessing through you. And we are, Isaiah is the prophet that said that we would be Or Lagoyim, a lamp, a light unto the nations. And that after the bad things, and Yaakov suffered a lot, after the bad things is the Ufaratsta, is the expansion, which brings good things both to us and to the world around us. Okay, so that's the Sforno. The Netziv comes back to the phrase, oh, your kids are going to be like dust. What's that mean? It isn't just about being an increase. It's not just about being numerous, which has already been prophesied to Avraham. And Avraham had the prophecy in a much nicer way. He said, oh, look at the stars. If you can count the stars, then that's how numerous your kids will be. Here we're compared to dust, but he says, why? Rather, it's a metaphor for our lowly status in the world. We are often, in some of our down periods, the people that are, trodden upon by our host nations all over the world. Almost every nation, has periods of glory. There was a golden age of Spain. There was a marvelous age of Poland. And then afterwards comes, terrible persecutions. And during those persecutions, we have this lowly status in the world. And then you'll spread. So what's that mean? Even in Galut, even when we're in exile, the diaspora, and the lowly status, you will spread to all the corners of the earth. It's a funny thing that some of our persecutions have really been an impetus for Jews to really go all over the place. One of the first Spanish sailors to come off the boat with Columbus was a Jew. And there were Jews on Columbus's ship because the Jews at the same time were getting thrown out of Spain. So at least 7 Jews have been identified in the roster of sailors, because even the persecutions have caused us to spread all over the world. When we get kicked out of places, it really is an opportunity for Jews to populate, far-flung corners of the world. Will be blessed through you. So even though you're going to be spread and you're going to be lowly, we will end up being a blessing. Why? Even in the Galut, they will be blessed through you. In this way, it will be understood that your continued existence is only because of divine supervision. There's a fascinating theory of history that claims that Jewish population is a is a factor in many countries becoming very successful. In other words, Rome had almost all the Jews in the world, and they became very great. Greece had almost all the Jews in the world, and they became very great. But that also was true of Spain. Spain became great when they had a lot of Jews. And country after country that is very successful is quite often is the country at that moment with the largest Jewish population. It was even true for the Polish-Lithuanian state in the early 1600s. That was where a lot of Jews were living, and it was a very successful empire for almost a century. So it's a fascinating correlation between Jewish population and national success for the host country. That's the point of the Netziv. God will stand over and shepherd you. God will watch you and guide you. This wouldn't be noticed if you were always successful in the world. In other words, the fact that we continue to survive is seen both, number one, as really a cool success story, but even when things are bad, the Jewish population continues to spread and be places that you'd never expect them to be. Rather, your continued growth, even in adversity, will be seen as divine providence. So, in other words, yes, in a large Jewish population is often an indicator of great success for a nation or an empire. But a lot of bad guys have spread us all over the world. So, in other words, the spread of the Jews sometimes came in very painful ways. So we don't always have it great, but when we get spread and our numbers increase, even under difficult circumstances, the Netziv is saying, oh, that's a proof that God is blessing us, because otherwise we wouldn't increase when we were in trouble. So the Jews' history throughout the world is a roller coaster. But during this roller coaster ride, we have spread everywhere and have had a tremendous influence on world history. The Malbim. Whenever we have the blessing of seed, your zera, your seed, your offspring is the way we translate it. It's children, but the word really means seed. Whenever we have the word seed, we also have the blessing of land. An interesting idea, which I must be honest, I hadn't noticed. Maybe I don't remember seeing this Malbim before. But wherever we have seed, we also have references to Eretz. And it makes sense because seeds can only grow in earth. So whenever we have the Jews referred to as Zerah, there is a reference in it to some geographic land location. For they are connected and conditioned upon each other. Seeds can't grow without land. And land is only successful if the agriculture succeeds. For the successful planting of our people will only happen in the chosen land. And the chosen land is only a garden-like successful society when the Jews are in control. Then annual spread. You will spread throughout the land. The reference isn't to the whole world like almost everybody else has said. The Malbim says, no. That's talking about the way Yehoshua conquered the land after the 40 years in the desert around the year 1225 BCE, who conquered from south to east to west, and only afterwards did he go to the northern areas. He seemed to have followed the directions in our verse. And all the families of the earth were blessed through you. This is the same blessing that Avraham was given back when he was told to leave Haran and come to Eretz Yisrael. But that he feels was just a continuation of the blessing of Avraham, while the other parts of the verse really seem to be brand new facets of God's blessings for the nation. Okay. The Or HaChaim. The Or HaChaim was one of those wonderful Jews who made Aliyah from North Africa to Yerushalayim, and he died in Yerushalayim in 1750. And he really identifies with a lot of what we consider today to be Zionistic ideas. He was very much an Ohev of Eretz Yisrael. He loved Eretz Yisrael very, very much. This is a very long comment that I took, as you can see, just a few lines from, because it goes on and on talking about how wonderful the Jews are connected to Eretz Yisrael. But here he's going to say another thing. We find that this blessing was fulfilled for Jacob in Aram, that he was very successful. He was very successful. We see that he happened in the house of Lavan, outside of Eretz Yisrael, because the Midrash records that until Jacob's arrival there, the people suffered from a shortage of water. In other words, remember that scene that happens in this week's Parsha? He rolls the rock alone off the well top. Well, that was because there was very little water. And so they had to protect their water resources. But soon after Yaakov lives there, the water sources increase tremendously, and he can take his sheep all over the place to feed them water, because the land got blessed with water through the presence of Yaakov. As soon as Jacob arrived, those people were blessed with an abundance of water. And you know what? It also happened to Yaakov again. Similarly, we find that the famine stopped. Remember, he comes down to Egypt during the 7 years of famine because there's no food in Eretz Yisrael. But what happens? As soon as Yaakov arrived in Egypt, the Nile overflowed its banks to irrigate the fields, and the famine was over. So we see that according to the Or HaChaim, the blessings in the verse aren't just talking about some future utopia or messianic dream. These things really happened to Yaakov in his own lifetime, that when he went someplace, that place got blessed. And again, I'm going to repeat what I said about 10 minutes ago. There are many countries that the presence of Jews seemed to be a catalyst for that nation to be very successful. Whether it was Spain, or it was other countries. I have to decline this call. I hope this person doesn't mind. I'll talk to him later. Okay. This is not good. Okay, this is not good. Okay. Hello. Hello. I'm sorry. I'll call you back in about half an hour. I'm on Zoom. What's happening? Hello. I'm on a Zoom. I'll call in about half an hour. Okay, sorry. Bye. Please forgive. I apologize. Okay. So now, so we see that these blessings, according to Or HaChaim, began already in the life of Yaakov Avinu. They're not just messianic. They're things that do happen throughout Jewish history, that there are golden ages for Jews in many different places, that we contributed greatly to many both ancient and modern societies. Okay. And on the backside, Rabbeinu Bechaye. So he says, texturally, the texture of sand is what he's talking about, texture. God assures Yaakov that his descendants will be very numerous like the dust. There's a texture to dust. He could have used the stars in the heaven, a simile which had been used already, both with Avraham and with Yitzchak. But God wanted to allude to a second element here. There's something else about the spread of the Jews. It's not just that we are numerous and we are prosperous and we contribute to the societies in which we live. Something else happens. The reference to dust always evokes feelings of something low, stepped upon, something denigrated. A reference to periods when the Jews would be in exile, treated by their hosts as dust to walk on. And there were periods when we really felt like the Jews were really getting trampled upon by the host nation. There is a positive, encouraging side of dust. What does that mean? As a result of stepping on dust, the dust rises and covers the person who has stepped on it, or at least upon that person's feet. Thus, after completion of their exiles, the Jews will experience the rise above those who trod upon them, upon us. So in other words, dust has a way, and those of us who do any laundry know this is true. Dust has a way of taking its revenge, right? And dust is something that just survives all sorts of situations. And so the dust is initially seemingly very, very derogatory, but can eventually become something positive and powerful. Thus, after the completion of their exiles, the Jews will experience the rise above those who trod upon them. Isaiah 14:2 said it, they shall be captors of their captors and masters of their taskmasters. So in other words, the whole story of history is the Jews will have the last laugh. That's the point of Rabbeinu Bechaye, and he feels that is the emphasis in the verse. This explains why God compared the descendants to dust. And then in parenthesis is a fascinating, I'm not going to spend a lot of time about it. There's a fascinating aside. Compare it to hit na'ari me'afa kumi. Compare it to rouse yourselves and rise from the dust, which we sing in Lecha Dodi on Friday night. Now I put it in parentheses right here, but the fact of the matter is, in Rabbeinu Bechaye, he says compare it to the phrase hit na'ari, arouse yourself, may afar kumi, rise up from the dust, which is based on a verse in Isaiah, but this is the quote from the song Lecha Dodi that we sing on Friday night. The funny thing is that this quote from the song is in the Rabbeinu Bechaye. Now, what's funny about that is that Rabbeinu Bechaye wrote his commentary in around 1220 of the Common Era, and the song Lecha Dodi wasn't written till about 1540, about 300 years later. So almost definitely somebody in a later printing of the book inserted this line from Lecha Dodi, but it's true, even though it's not in Rabbeinu Bechaye. This theme of rising from the dust and that being a powerful image existed all the way back to Isaiah. It existed here in our verse. It exists in Rabbeinu Bechaye, and it's part of Lecha Dodi that we sing on Friday night. In Yaakov's dream, the dream of the ladder with God standing above, in Yaakov's dream, God added, and you will spread out to the west, etc., right, to the 4 points of the compass, to make plain that the dust was ultimately, the dust was to be interpreted positively as the dust of the earth endures forever. There is dust everywhere. We can clean all we want, but in 2 days, the dust will be back. In other words, comparing us to dust is comparing us to something which is, number one, eternal, and number two, is ultimately successful, that we succeed in establishing our place. To make plain that the dust was to be interpreted positively as the dust of the earth endures forever. Similarly, Yaakov's descendants would and do endure forever. Okay, before we get to Rav Stav, who is Rav David Stav, who's one of the prominent, I'm going to say, modern Orthodox rabbis here in Eretz Yisrael. He's Israeli. We think of modern Orthodox quite often as American, but he's just a wonderful man who does a lot of work, both from his home community and organizations he's involved with, and very special. But before that, there's like a side little trip into Hasidus by the Sfat Emet. The Sfat Emet is going to take our idea and do something that he does with many, many ideas. And he's going to say it's really talking about Shabbos. Now, all of the Divrei Torah in the Sfat Emet were delivered on Shabbat, and he had a secretary with a photographic memory who would record them after Shabbat. Once in a while, we see that there are mistakes and people have to correct them, or they'll say that this one didn't get recorded very well. I don't know, maybe the person with the perfect memory was away that Shabbat. I don't know. But they're all delivered on Shabbat and recorded, written down after Shabbat. So he quite often sticks into a Dvar Torah that seems to have nothing to do with Shabbat, like this one, and says, oh, really, it's talking about Shabbos. Okay, but let's see what he has to say here. You shall spread to the west, etc., our verse, the four directions of the compass. Our sages link this to the verse, and I shall feed you the inheritance of Yaakov, indicating that one who delights in Shabbat receives a boundless inheritance. So in other words, our verse, ufaratsta, spreading seemingly to the horizon, spreading endlessly, infinitely, that's a reference to Shabbos. That Shabbos, the little one day of Shabbos spreads to affect the entirety of our lives and encompasses everything of our Jewish experience. And he goes on, and Hashem's name, Shaddai, which usually gets translated as Almighty, but it's the term Sheh, who, or that, die, is sufficient, or the one who said, die, stop, enough, stop, signifies the attribute that limited the world's expansion. Now, as God created the world until he said, die, must be, enough. That's a big enough universe. We don't need it to be any larger. He's the God who said, Sheh, that said, die, enough. As the wicked were unworthy of its full potential. In other words, the universe could have been infinite if people were worthy of an infinite universe. But we believe that the universe does have boundaries. Similarly, the light of the first day was received and hidden away for the tzaddikim because we didn't want the bad guys to get this beautiful, wonderful light, miraculous light that existed when God said, Vayehi Or. We have a pale shadow of that original light. The four directions are also linked to the four-letter name of God. So in other words, north, east, west, and south, we think spells news, right? N-E-W-S. But really, we in Judaism say, no, the four directions really represent the four letters, Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, the four letters in God's name. That's what the four directions, because God, the four-letter tetragrammaton name of God, controls the universe. But it also represents the four fundamental natural states of matter: fire, water, air, and earth. That those four are the four ways in which material can appear: solid, gas, liquid, and plasma. Okay? So physical limitations do not bind the tzaddik, much like a king who can break walls. Now, this reference to kings breaking walls is a Gemara in Baba Batra about the power of eminent domain of kings. Kings, if they want, can take your vineyard and put a king's highway through it if they so desire. And so it said God gives that power of control over all of the facets of creation to the tzaddik. The tzaddik to a Hasidic Rebbe means him. The tzaddik equals the Rebbe. Now, outside is called the head of the Hasidic movement, a Rebbe. Inside the movement that is called the tzaddik. They refer to it as the tzaddik. Since tzaddikim sustain the world wouldn't continue spinning on an axis if we didn't have 36 tzaddikim. No borders can confine them. This potential exists in every Jew, even though the people that display this power are the tzaddikim, are the great rebbeim, but every Jew somewhere in himself or herself has this power. But the inner light is limited by the physical body. It's only the tzaddikim that learn how to sublimate their physical being to the spiritual power. But theoretically, anyone could do it, maybe only for a minute, but any Jew who has that power inside can do it. As the soul permeates the body, Hashem will expand one's borders. We can do more and be more. Eating on Shabbos is a mitzvah that elevates the body and grants a limitless spiritual inheritance, overcoming physical constraints. In other words, on Shabbat, we live ufaratzta. And what does ufaratzta really mean? You should break through the barriers of the mundane, of the regular, of the profane, and make everything holy. And that happens on Shabbat. This piece of bread on Friday, it's just a piece of bread. On Shabbos, it's a mitzvah, and it's challah, and it's part of the spiritual experience of Shabbat. So we can all do this. According to him, the Rebbe can do it. The Rebbe can be Yaakov Avinu, and so can we, but only on Shabbos. Okay. Rav Stav looks at our verse in a sociological way. Now, Rav Stav is, relatively speaking, a liberal, tolerant rabbi, big Talmud Chacham, wonderful scholar, but relatively middle of the road. He tends to be Zionistic, but we're going to see something very powerful in the comment he's making here, based on our verse, but describing our situation here in Eretz Yisrael, I believe. There are those who fear that this isolationism could lead the family and later the nation, that this family would produce to hostility towards others. So we are told that we're going to be separate and different from everybody. And he's saying people may think that there's a danger in that, that we would become, monks. We would, live in a Shangri-La and not have anything to do with the rest of the world. That's not true. It's not true. It is God's blessing to Jacob that it is important to stress that the nation building must not be synonymous with nationalism. This version of nation building does not consider the nation's growth and prosperity the be-all and end-all of our existence. No. It's wonderful to be successful, but that's not the goal. The success, the prosperity, perhaps the wealth, is a means to something greater. Rather, the focus is that the blessing on this nation will lead to blessings for the entire world. Whatever it is we have, we're supposed to be sharing with all of humanity. And all the families of the earth will be blessed through you, God told Abraham on at least 2 occasions. With this in mind, with this idea that the whole world gets its brachot, its blessing, its divine direction through us, we can interpret the word ufaratzta completely differently. Let's take a new look. Let's look at ufaratzta from a different point of view. Ufaratzta is what beckons us to reject the simplistic notion that by coming together as a nation and as a family, we ignore the needs of others. God forbid. Never think for a minute the fact that we are successful in coming here and making our nation and it's wonderful. Every other Jew is your brother and your sister. This is wonderful, but we're supposed to use this power that it gives us and the success that it gives us to help others. Very few things that Israel does, excites me and inspires me more than when, God forbid, there's a disaster someplace, and the first people on the spot are Israelis, saving lives and helping people and utilizing our talents and breakthroughs in usually in technology to help other people. It was a wonderful idea of Golda Meir in the 60s, before she was prime minister, when she was in the foreign ministry, to go to Africa and teach and spread our ideas of agriculture, that we're supposed to be concerned for everybody. When it says the whole world is blessed to us, that means we have to work at it and show them the blessings. So when it says that you should spread, it means really you should spread your ideas, your knowledge, your know-how to help everybody. Yes, you're going to be a nation, a regular nation in Eretz Israel, and that's where you should be. But from there, you spread out to help everybody. Over the generations, our nation has produced scientists and thinkers completely devoted to bettering the entire world, as it should be. Our prophets conveyed this idea of some Jewish philosopher giving ideas that makes the world a better place. That's just carrying on the tradition of the Nevi'im. We look at the Nevi'im as only spiritual guides, but they were philosophers too. Shlomo HaMelech was a philosopher. Yeshayahu was a philosopher. And we have to view it that way. And their ideas, they shared with the world. It's a wonderful thing that the most popular book in the world, in the history of the world, is Tanakh, is the Bible. Our prophets conveyed a strong message of hope to the weak and underprivileged of all nations. They called for the shattering of the tyranny of the strong, regardless of which nation was under its yoke. Historically, we Jews have always stood up for the person who was being oppressed. And they blessed other nations through the blessing they received. We shared our blessings with the world, as both ideas and even in terms of physical help when necessary. This seems to be the meaning of Jacob's heaven-reaching ladder being rooted on the ground. That's who we Jews are. We're firmly rooted in the ground, and that ground is Eretz Yisrael. But our heads, our minds, our capabilities spread throughout the known world. we use our base here to really spread goodness to as much of the world as we can. Our dreams and visions must not be detached from this world. In other words, yeah, we shouldn't be Luftmenschen. We should be practical and help people in real ways. We begin by building our collective, our country. And once we have accomplished this, we can project it out in all directions. And countries that have accepted our help have done very well. But we know that, anti-Semitism is a big block to our helping others as much as we would like to. It is not coincidental that our nation's greatest breakthroughs occurred in exile. Abraham discovers his God outside the land of Israel. And only then he is asked to head toward the promised land. Jacob, too, was told of the great breakthrough that would occur when he would go into exile. The Torah was given in exile. The prophecies of Yechezkel were given in exile. In other words, yes, we are based here in Eretz Yisrael, but we Jews are universal. And that, according to Rav Stav, that's what the word ufaratsta means. Yes, it means numerous. Yes, it means powerful. Yes, it means rich. Yes, it means all sorts of wonderful things that we talked about by other commentaries. But I think ultimately we have to look at this bracha that we can really spread and grow and prosper. We should look at this bounty as something that we share and endow the rest of the world with. And I think it's very important and very beautiful to see the pasuk that way. One of the most moving scenes in the life of Yaakov Avinu is when he finally gets down to Egypt. And Pharaoh looks at him and says, "Could you give me a bracha?" And that's the way the world is supposed to look at us. That's the way that we're supposed to be seen. And that's the way we're supposed to behave. That, yes, we would like to bless the rest of the world, to endow the rest of the world. We have to make sure that our nation is firmly settled on the ground. But once we get firmly settled on the ground, build that ladder up to the sky, helping everybody and spreading ufaratsta, all of this wealth which isn't gold, wealth which is ideas and knowledge and science and philosophy. And we just have so much to share. And it begins with the blessing of Yaakov, started really with Avram, but we see it clearly stated here by Yaakov. And it's something that we should think about all the time. It's when you see some of these debates in the UN and everybody says how terrible we are or whatever, and then you see the Jews and the state of Israel going out and helping others, and being kind and good to others, and we know that it's that second picture that's true. That first picture is a bunch of baloney. The reality is we really want to help and to be good and to carry on the brachot received by our avot and handed down to us, and they're with us so that we can share them with the entire world. We're often very successful at it, but right now I think we're in a moment where the world isn't willing to listen, but that'll change soon, Bezrat Hashem. And hopefully Rav Stav's vision of what Yaakov's bracha was will again become something that the entire world benefits from. And that's, to me, part of what Hashem had in mind for Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and all of us. Okay. Thank you so much for joining this evening. Okay. And Gail, again, you and Norman are in our prayers, and we hope to see you back home very, very soon. Okay. Good night, all.